Hey everyone, Boardgame Brody here with Meeple Mountain. I have an advanced copy of Gardeners here. It's a real-time tile placement deduction game by Sit Down. So in Gardeners, players all play together to place out tiles in specific places, forming a square at all times. The size of the square depends on what mode that you're playing in the game and how many players are playing the game with you. Constraint cards will come out and make rules as to how some of the tiles need to be placed, but not everyone knows the exact placement rule or rules. And as rounds progress, a constraint card will be added each round until there are a total of 3. And when a constraint card comes out, one player will receive it and know the specifics of that rule, while all the other players don't know the details. But on the back side of that card shows that kind of constraint that it is, so that they have an idea, a general idea of what it could be, but not like the player who knows the exact rule. So you might know one constraint in full and 2 other constraint types, and you have to work together by adding and removing tiles to complete a square of a certain shape, and then do it again and again until the time runs out. And each time you finish the square and have obeyed all the constraints, the team gains a point. So you gain points when you have successfully placed tiles and that those tiles all obey the 3 constraint cards. And then the oldest constraint card is removed and a new one comes out. Players continue removing and placing out tiles, again, trying to obey all the active constraints. Once the timer ends, players count up how many points they have. 10 plus points makes you an expert. 4 to 6 points gives you a bravo. And 2 to 3 points means you're progressing well. You need to keep it up. Players will begin by learning the game through training exercises to have a good base idea of the mechanics of the game and the flow of the game. And it's a real-time game, so knowing is half the battle, and it will help you play quicker, which in turn will help you score better. After performing the 3 different trainings, you can then play with the beginner mode, and then the normal mode, and then the super secret expert mode. That is such a surprise. Sit Down doesn't even trust me with it, so I don't even know what's in it, what it will do. There is also a solo mode for all the solo gamers out there. Watch out for that. So let me explain the details of the game to get a better idea of the intricacies and see what you might want to own if you might want to own this game. So again, this is a simultaneous cooperative game played in real time and without talking to each other about the game. And you actually probably shouldn't be talking about other things either. You won't do well in the game if you do so. So if you know that person who likes to talk about other things while playing the game, like my wife Lauren, well, they won't like this game because the game is all about business. The game lasts the duration of the sand timer, which is supposed to be 15 minutes, but I timed mine out and it was 16 minutes and 10 seconds. I think maybe the sand just takes longer to fall, maybe in Nebraska. I don't know. Players are trying to deduce the constraints that they don't know the full details of, and they need to observe where those tiles are being placed and removed by other players to know what they might need to change. So constraint cards have 2 sides. The back side is the side with a white border, and it shows the type of constraint the card holds. This side will be seen by all players. The front of the card indicates the specifics of that constraint. Only the player who has this card will see this side and know the constraint in detail. So this type of card is a proximity constraint, meaning a certain element cannot be alone, and it must always be orthogonally adjacent to at least one identical element. This is a distance constraint. A specific element cannot be orthogonally adjacent to another specific element. It needs to be far away. This is an agglomeration constraint, and that means that a certain number of elements of the same type, or maybe 2 types, must be in orthogonally contiguous groups, and it can form any shape at all. This is the Panorama Constraint. All tiles containing a bench must have the bench facing a certain element. This is the link constraint. You have to make a link using a certain type of element to make a continuous group connecting 2 sides of the garden, one side to the other. This is the border constraint. Either all elements of a certain type must be one of the tiles on the outside of the edge of the garden, or all elements of the certain type need to be in the interior of the garden. This is the geometry constraint. This constraint specifies that a certain arrangement of elements must be represented in the garden at least once. This is the path constraint. Some or all paths must be connected to form a continuous open or closed route depending on whatever the specifics says. Knowing all those constraints right there should give you a great idea of what constraints you might be dealing with during the game. So at the beginning of the game, the first player will draw a constraint card. They get to look at the front and then they place it in front of them. So the back is facing up. So the first round will be done with just one constraint card, but at the beginning of each subsequent rounds, the next player to the left, they will draw a constraint card and do the same. Whenever, or at the point when the fourth constraint card comes out, which will be on each round after round 3, the oldest card is removed to a pile that will score, and you will only play with 3 constraint cards at a time. So to help you feel the theme in the game, the constraint cards represent the king's wishes on how he wants his garden. The king only tells one person, but expects everyone to know and respect his wishes. The king also sometimes changes his wishes, and you will keep changing the garden over and over again, because as a king, there is nothing better to do. So after a new constraint is drawn, players will now arrange the garden. There are no turns. Everyone plays at the same time, and each player can only perform one action at a time, which means either adding a tile or removing a tile, not doing both at the same times. So to help obey this, players are encouraged to only use one hand. This will cause all players to only do one action at a time. But you can perform as many actions back to back to back without waiting on anyone else. Each player will have their own personal stack of tiles, and when adding a tile from their personal supply, they have to place the topmost tile of their stack. Now, during the game, some tiles may be placed out by other players incorrectly because everyone needs a chance to figure out what the constraints are that other players have. Removing tiles let you rearrange the garden so you can respect all of the constraints for that round, but you can only remove tiles from the edge of the garden. If you need to change a tile that is in the middle of the garden, you have to remove tiles from the outside in until you get to the point where that tile is now on the edge, and then you can remove it. When you remove a tile, you must immediately place it in front of another player next to their personal supply face up, not covering up any other tiles out there. You can never move a tile from within the garden from one place to another, nor rotate a tile without removing it. And you can never split the tiles into 2 groups. It always needs to be connected. As the game goes on, players will have their own stack of tiles from their own supply, plus possibly multiple other tiles that have been removed by other players and given to them left on the side. At this point, you can place the top tile from your stack or any tile that another player has given you by removing it and placing it near you. If a tile needs repositioned, you will need to remove it and give it to another player, and hopefully they understand what they should do with it at that time. Or players can just add a different tile in hopes that they continue to obey all the constraints that are active. Once all the garden tiles have been placed and no one wants to remove or add any more, players will move to the next phase, which is checking the garden. When checking the garden, players will check if all tiles comply with their constraint card, and players will make an announcement, "His Majesty is angry," or "His Majesty is thrilled." If the king is angry, players will return back to the previous phase and rearrange the garden. A tile somewhere needs to be removed. If all players say the king is thrilled, then the garden is validated and the round is complete. Now, this entire time that I've been talking about, the constraint cards are never flipped over for other players to see what the constraint might be. And the timer is never placed down to kind of pause the game. It runs the entire time. So players will start a new phase by drawing a new constraint card. All tiles will be placed, and players will start that round by removing tiles since all of them are placed already. This will happen over and over again if the timer is still dropping sand, that is, and after 3 rounds, the team will start scoring points. Once the timer runs out, then the game ends. Players will calculate their score by counting each finished constraint card. Each one of those cards is 1 point each. And if in the game you ever get 2 constraints that contradict each other, or it just makes it too hard for your team to complete, then you can discard that card and draw a new one. But at the end, each discarded card after the first one gives you a negative point. With time, you will get better and better and beat your own highest score and do better in the game. And, well, that's Gardens. I hope you now know how to play the game. And before I tell you what I think about the game, please comment below on this video and subscribe to the channel. I'm pretty sure that's what the king would want you to do. And, you know, he never changes his mind, so you might as well just go do it. So this is a game that you have to play multiple times to do well at. Play multiple times to enjoy it, and play it multiple times to fully feel what the designer designed this game for. The game holds true to a feeling of a teamwork and a sense of meshing well with each other, or maybe not at all. When it's not at all, the game can be rough and you are trying to kind of signal to other players that certain tiles are not working well. And in doing so, this delays your time to get to the next round. But when everyone gels well with each other and maybe players still don't know what some of the constraints are, but they know how to play the game well enough to let other players do their part, then really each player with a constraint does their own part by making sure that their constraint is being obeyed. And then sometimes the other players don't need to figure out the specifics of that constraint, what they're actually trying to do. They will have an idea and they will just let that player control what goes in that space. So that's why when players gel well together and understand that yes, there is a deduction part of this game, but if you don't want to guess on the specifics, you have other players who know more and can pick up that part of the puzzle. This is a team game, and it's impossible for one player to do all the work, and that is the biggest gem that I can see in this design. All players have to be part of the game and work on the puzzle together, and maybe a player is stronger at understanding certain moves and who to give what tiles to or removing them from the board, but that is just a small aspect of this big picture. Also, the game is an experience that changes the longer that you play and you learn the game. It's a fun experience that to go through, and you get better and better as you play. And this is also possible because the game is only 15 or 16 minutes and 10 seconds long, so playing the game over and over again is very easy to do. There is a small memory component to the game because a constraint will stay present for 3 rounds. So if you figure out what a constraint is from another player when it comes out, it's going to make the next 2 rounds easier. So as you already know more of the constraints, you will go faster. Ultimately, this is a game that puts you through a new experience that is not taught or shown in many other games. Not a lot of them do this. It's a game of teamwork, deduction, speed, and having fun figuring out the puzzle from round to round. The designer is known for making unique games that almost no other games can do, and they also ease players into the game following 3 training exercises until the normal game can be handled. Players will graduate to harder modes and then can experience the top secret expert mode that I still don't get to experience myself yet. So build the King's Garden over and over and over again with your family and friends in Gardens by Sit Down. Again, this is Board Game Brody, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Stick around and check out some other board game reviews to see what you might want to get to the table.